Hi everybody, and welcome to DnD Horror Stories with DnD Doge. In today's video, we have a story about a dungeon master that uses a bugbear with an umbrella to torment his Dungeons & Dragons party. A story about a dungeon master insta-killing a player's character due to his own homebrew rules, and more. But first, here is a Luna update. She's definitely gotten really comfortable, and is making a great recovery since I first found her along the side of the road. So again, thank you all who helped by sharing and donating to the GoFundMe for her. As I said before, you truly helped save a kitty. But with that said, let's get into these D&D horror stories. My dungeon master won't stop using a bugbear with an umbrella to undermine us at every turn. By Reddit user LadiesMan90s. So recently, we have been dealing with a group of goblins and bugbears in our sessions. Our dungeon master is usually level-headed. However, he has clearly lost it. Recently, he has decided to implement a series of encounters involving bugbears and goblins with umbrellas. This sounds ridiculous, but trust me, it gets worse. These bugbears and goblins use these umbrellas to fly like Mary Poppins. Normally, this would be okay, but every time we go to attack their leader, our dungeon master shouts out, "It's too late, he already flew off," no matter if we're using bows or magic. Heck, even magic missile misses, what shouldn't be possible, and he will then say something like, "He already flew off, it's too late now." Since he uses this bugbear to undermine our party at every turn, like kidnapping an NPC we are talking to by swooping in and flying away mid-conversation. The worst instance of this was us fighting one of the big bad bosses that we've been tracking down for a year, in real life. And this damn bugbear just swoops in and takes him away before we can end him. Because we know he's going to appear at least once every session now, we have tried various traps to catch him. A rope trap, box with stick, ambush, decoy NPC, but nothing works because our dungeon master claims he has an intelligence of 25 and a knack for sabotage. What does that even mean? We all got together after our last session, and we are running out of ideas, and we are desperate. We are going to try a giant glue trap next session, and hopefully that will solve our problems. He's been doing this for the past 2 months, and we are all at our wits' end. When we bring up to him how ridiculous and impossible to deal with this is, he just says, "Well, I can't think of many ways you could stop him," and then just brushes us off. Recently, he hasn't even just been kidnapping NPCs, but is also swooping in and stealing our rations and magic items. The game is nigh unplayable at this point, and there's nothing we can do. Well, what? This is by far one of the most bizarre stories I've read in a while. It certainly is a unique thing to have to deal with in a game of Dungeons & Dragons. A dungeon master with a deus ex machina in the form of a Mary Poppins bugbear that comes in to screw over the players every single session. I can certainly see how that could get old really fast. I would say to rally up the other players and figure out a way to talk to the dungeon master about how this is ruining the game for you all. And if it doesn't stop, or at least doesn't happen every session, that you aren't interested in the campaign anymore. Remember, no D&D is better than bad D&D. Let's move on. Dungeon Master killed my first ever character in the first session of my first campaign for breaking his world by accident. By Reddit user aromanticlawyer5847. I've been reading stories on this sub for a while, and thought I'd share the story of my first time being a player. This was about 5 to 6 years ago now, so some details are fuzzy, and honestly, I look back and laugh at it. So, I was a dungeon master for friends in high school for 3 months, but had never played as a player character. None of us had any experience, but decided to just jump for it, and I was elected DM. That group ended when real life started again, and we all drifted apart. I missed Dungeons & Dragons, and thought I'd check out some website that lets DMs advertise games for people looking to play. I found one in the next city over, since it was the only one in my area that used 5th edition, and messaged the Dungeon Master. He seemed cool, and sent me his world info, which was a novel. I'm talking 60+ pages of just lore that he wanted everyone to memorize before Session 0. He also had a few other homebrew systems, including, quote, regional languages, which basically got rid of Common and every other player's handbook language and replaced them with a series of different languages based on countries. The important part of that is that there is no common language. That will come up. I honestly don't remember anyone else, as they were fine, but beyond one person, I think everyone else was brand new to his table too. At the very least, one other person was. At least 2 of us were brand new to Dungeons & Dragons, and made sure that the Dungeon Master knew this, and he said he was cool with it and would help us figure things out. We do character creation in Session 0, and everything seems to be fine, until a certain point. I make a human rogue, and by some miracle, I knew like 8 languages. The Dungeon Master seemed upset because he wanted us to struggle with language barriers, even between the party members. I asked him if I should change something, but he said it was fine, and he will work around it. The first session starts, and fairly early on, I'm a bit annoyed, as I have to translate for the party, and instead of letting me go, "Oh, I translate," he wants me to repeat what everyone says, word for word, for each party member in their own language. I feel like I'm not getting to do much beyond being a parrot, and I'm feeling pretty discouraged. The big thing, though, was my inventory. The core idea of this world was that one day, all metal in the ground vanished, and because of that, any goods made of metal were worth some multiple extra depending on their material. It turned out in my starting inventory was steel ball bearings, 100 I think. I was listing my inventory at some point, and he got super upset because it turned out each ball bearing was worth like 1,000 gold pieces a piece or something. One of the other people suggested that we reflavor them as amber or some natural material, but he told them that the book said steel, and he would just find a workaround. So the party gets to the first town, and we split up. I decide to look for an inn, find one, and ask for a room. The Dungeon Master describes how the innkeep locks me in a room that starts to get crazy hot, with me seeing no other option to try to break out. The guards see me and decide I must be a criminal, and give me a swift execution by fire, with no save or any ability to do anything about it. The Dungeon Master tells me that he hopes I had a backup ready for the rest of the session. I had no idea what a backup was, since this was my first time ever being a player. I felt like he was mad at me because my character broke his world and game idea. I was just a brand new player that just wanted to play a silly little rogue, but instead got punished. I just called my dad to come pick me up early, and the next day emailed the Dungeon Master saying that I was starting college soon and wouldn't have time for his game. Not the worst horror story on this sub, but I wanted to share my own little experience that sort of killed my excitement to play D&D for a while. I did eventually reconnect with some of my high school friends, and we now have 2 regular ongoing games, which are much better. Plus, we actually know how D&D works now. In the first campaign, it took us 4 sessions to learn that hit dice are not used for damage. TLDR, DM got mad at a first-time player because my starting inventory and languages broke his homebrew world, so he just instantly killed me instead. Well, that is a whole load of BS. First, the language system sounds super convoluted and seems like it would get in the way of the fun of the game. Then, to have OP actually repeat things, instead of just saying that they translate, could get super tedious. Then, when the Dungeon Master found out that OP had 100 ball bearings that would basically be worth 1,000 gold pieces each, he should have just taken that other player's advice of making them out of a different material. But this is a horror story, so of course, instead of doing something sensible like that, the Dungeon Master just outright kills OP's character, banking on OP having a backup. I don't blame OP for not going back after that, especially since I have a feeling that homebrew wouldn't turn out to be that fun anyway. At least it sounds like OP did eventually get back into Dungeons & Dragons, and is having a great time today. On to the next one. Dungeon Master invites 10+ people to a game and can't wrangle everyone. By Reddit user Draconic Descendant. All names have been changed to protect the identities of those involved. This story took place while I was in college. A few of my friends approached me and said that one of our mutual classmates, Doug, was planning on running a game of D&D 5e that Saturday, and that he was looking for players. Since I had no plans for the weekend, and I figured I wasn't going to spend it studying, I was happy to put myself forward. I started talking to Doug about it, and found out it was supposed to be a small game, and that if it went well, he might plan on making a full campaign out of it. We'd be starting at 5th level, and the plot would involve, quote, saving the world. Overall, a pretty general concept. I put together a basic monk, got Doug's approval, and waited for game day to arrive. Doug would be running it out of his apartment, and it sounded like there were going to be about 5 players there, including my 2 friends, and Doug's 2 roommates. I show up for the game, and I find out there's significantly more people there than anyone told me. A bit more about Doug. He'd been running games for several years, starting in high school. My friends described his games as, quote, chaotic but interesting. He'd only ever run 5e, but he was supposed to know the system inside and out. There was me, the 2 friends who invited me, and Doug's 2 roommates, but there was also 2 more of Doug's friends, and one of their girlfriends. 8 people already seemed like too much, but then a few friends of friends showed up, and now there were 11 people in total, crowded around the living room in Doug's apartment. Doug seemed unconcerned with how out of hand things might get, and assured us all he could handle it. In fact, he apparently knew beforehand this many people were going to show up, and had okayed everyone. But then, for some ungodly reason, he pulls out his laptop, and someone, I still have no idea to this day who, calls in to play over Skype. Doug sticks the laptop on a stool and starts trying to open the session. Not everyone who showed up actually made a character before they got there, but instead of walking everyone through character creation, Doug just asked the people without sheets what classes they wanted to play. He didn't fill out or hand anyone any additional character sheets, and he didn't explain to those players what their characters could do. Based off of everything I'd seen up until this point, I already knew there was no way this could turn out to be some kind of pleasant surprise. Doug was totally disorganized. The living room had fallen into several different conversations, and only half of the players had characters ready. I didn't leave because my friends were there. I didn't value my time, and I needed to see what was going to happen. After a significant delay, Doug is able to start us all off. I don't recall the specifics, but the party all started in a prison tower in the middle of a city. Somehow, each of the party members are let out of their cells, and we all come together, but must still find a way to escape the tower. We quickly realize that there are open windows nearby, but we're a significant distance up. Fortunately, 2 of the party casters have Featherfall, which accounts for 10 out of 11 party members. I volunteer to be the odd one out, and instead use my monk's slowfall ability to reach the ground safely. After escaping the tower, we're approached by someone who is clearly a very high-level monk, probably level 20. Doug describes him as being an Indian guru type, with a long flowing beard, white robes, and a white turban. Immediately, one of the more murdery members of our party tries to attack him, only for the guru to hit them with a palm strike, which Doug describes as filling them with a feeling of deep tranquility, thus rendering them unable to act violently. Most of the rest of the players start joking that the guru just lobotomized that guy, almost starting a tangent conversation. But then, Doug starts to roleplay. Now, when it comes to using accents for your characters, I haven't really been in many situations where it's come into question whether or not something crosses a line into being offensive. The majority of my games have been text-based, so this issue hasn't really come up much, especially after high school. But that being said, Doug puts on an incredibly thick, awkward, and stereotypical enlightened Indian guru accent. Sitting in the middle of this room with all these people while he voiced this character was surreal. I glanced around at everyone else to gauge whether or not it was just me who thought it was too much. About half the people there looked like they were either weirded out, put off, or couldn't believe this was happening. The other half seemed like they thought it was hilarious. I really don't think he had any bigoted intentions by doing this. It's just that he was too socially awkward to realize how distasteful it was. The guru explains that he is the head of the country's holy order, and that he recently received a vision that a great evil was coming. He tells us that he freed us so that we could stop it. Immediately, one of the other characters asks why the guru couldn't just do it himself. Doug gets visibly annoyed by the question and doesn't answer it, instead telling us that we needed to get out of the city and go somewhere else. For reasons that can only be implied, the guru didn't involve himself beyond the bare minimum that was needed to get us out of prison and explain where we had to go next. We started to make our way out, but by this point, an alarm had been raised and the city guard was on alert. We end up in a confrontation with a guard patrol, and we have a messy combat with a lot of people asking questions about what they can do, passing dice back and forth, starting side conversations, and going into other rooms. Several people end up checking out by this point. Those of us who stayed engaged ended up witnessing the game fall apart when it became apparent that two of the player characters, a paladin and a barbarian, had opposite alignments, lawful good and chaotic evil respectively. The two began arguing when the barbarian wanted to eat the dead guards. This resulted in PvP, which was probably the last straw that made the session fall apart. Doug made a weak attempt to mediate, but shortly thereafter declared that we had escaped the city. He said that we could look forward to another session later, maybe. We never got a follow-up session after this. I didn't get a chance to talk to my friends about it until later, but their takeaway was basically, yeah, that was a mess. We had no idea he had invited all those people. He stayed around for some other stuff our group did, and seemed like an okay guy, but I never really saw him after college. TLDR: Dungeon Master invites 10 plus players to a game without communicating to everyone how many people are going to be there, has trouble wrangling everyone, and voices a character with a borderline offensive accent. The session falls apart over the course of the first combat, and we never got a second one. Well, that game certainly sounded like a bit much. Perhaps Doug thought that since he had a lot of experience running games, that he could take on such a huge amount of players. Now, it could be possible, but he probably should have made sure that the people that he invited to play actually knew how to play, and made it clear that everyone should have characters made up ahead of time. Heck, he was so self-confident that he even had someone join via Skype. Now, the hook did seem decent enough, and I'm surprised that everyone was able to work together to get all of the players out of the tower and safely on the ground, considering that amount of players. But with that many people playing, especially with some that never played before, I'd say that game was destined to get out of control before too long. I mean, it doesn't sound like Doug is a bad DM by any means. I think he just bit off a bit more than he could chew. But that is all I have for you today. As always, I appreciate all of you, and may your games remain horror story free. Until next time.